maybe about a month, they've been talking about Russia's going to invade Ukraine.
Yeah.
So you need to look at all that then.
There's one other item, and I wonder where it comes in this time. Do you remember the massive increase in gas prices?
Yeah, yeah.
Did that follow the nixing of Nord Stream or precede it?
It followed it.
Followed it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Interesting.
well, it definitely
Because
it had an effect on it. The statement by the Germans that they would not put Nord Stream online was had a direct impact on the price of gas, because it provides its insecurity, instability. Obviously, we're not sure about supplies to Europe and stuff, and therefore potential scarcity drives the price up, right? And of course, they're trying to drive the price up in a certain sense because, specifically of maybe that particular type of gas, because America supplies liquefied natural gas rather than the type of gas that Russia provides, which is more easily produced and delivered, and more importantly, more cheaply produced and delivered to Europe.
And it's ready to use at the point of sale.
Rather than liquefied natural gas, which is predominantly what America produces in terms of gas, and it has to, if it's going to deliver to anybody, it has to ship it overseas, right? If it's going to export it, it has to come across the Atlantic on boats. So you see those big tankers with the big kind of round domes on them. Mm-hmm. But the problem with US LNG, liquefied natural gas, is that it's significantly more expensive than the gas that Russia produces. So if you can drive up the cost of Russian gas, then it makes it more attractive to European nations to switch to buying American gas or gas from any of America's partners, like, for example, Qatar. And actually, if you just throw up the Al Jazeera article, this ties into what I'm saying here, and this is just fairly recent. US are in talks as of, this is 22nd January, so yesterday. The US are in talks with Qatar over supplying LNG to EU. And the sources say US move comes after Russia, largest provider of energy to the EU, massed troops at the Ukrainian border. So the whole point
is interesting because they explicitly link the two issues.
Right, of course. And yeah, and the point here is to cut Russia off from Europe as an energy supplier, and in that way, deal a fairly significant economic blow to Russia and try and secure Europe for bolster European, let's say, allegiance or ideological allegiance to, and economic allegiance to, and political allegiance to America, because the Americans are afraid of Russia slipping, or of Europe slipping eastwards,
into the loving embrace
of Mother Russia, of the big bear, getting a big bear hug from Russia, and it's a deadly bear hug. It'll kill you.
It'll kill you.
So
you'll be trapped forever.
Yeah, and they've been concerned about this for a long time, obviously, and it's one of the overarching fears and concerns in the US State Department, regardless of which administration is in place, because we see actually one thing that they're unified on in Washington on both sides of the aisle is that Russia's evil and everybody has to do something about Russia, right? So, because America's strategic interests are at stake.
Attempt to connect ideology with economics. And that was when he was touting the beautiful freedom gas, the molecules of freedom that Texas is going to ship to Europe.
Right, yeah.
Don't mind that Nord Stream 2. That's just Russian. They don't want that stuff. That's not free. It doesn't have lessons of freedom in it. And we laughed at it, but he was articulating poorly what they're trying to actually convince European governments of.
Mm-hmm.
Ours is better. Well, I know it's more expensive at the moment, but it has a better feel to it. You know, it'll burn your homes with more, freedom.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now that comes with a side of freedom fries as well, of freedom gas, freedom molecules. There's a just to give you an idea of just how irrational, or where their thinking is, where the US is thinking is as far as Russia goes in terms of their attitude. The attitude they have and they want to convey about Russia. If you just throw up the Twitter link there too, it's Siddhant, I think, is the name of the Twitter
You sent me a link?
Sid Hunt, yeah. Didn't I?
No.
You did get us. Yeah, you did, yeah. So this guy is a German chief of the Navy. This video was just from a few days ago in India, where he was there for some other reason, talking to some Indian dudes from the Indian government, and somebody recorded it and released it. So maybe, who knows? I don't know if it was
So repetitious.
Yeah,
He didn't know.
deliberately done. I suppose not. No, and he's just commenting on the Russia situation, obviously as an aside to whatever else he was talking about, maybe, or maybe that was part of the reason he's in India. I don't know the details, but anyway, it's important to listen to what he's saying here in terms of the attitude of the West towards Russia.
Please come on, ladies and gentlemen. What is my minister asked me, what do you think what Russia really wants? And I had this just on the other side of the street. Is Russia really interested to have a small, tiny strip of Ukraine soil integrated in their country? No, this is nonsense. I think Putin is probably putting pressure on it because he can do it. And he knows if he splits the European Union. But what he really wants is respect. He wants, on eye level, he wants respect. And my God, giving someone respect is low cost, even no cost. So if I was asked, I haven't asked, but I was asked, it is easy to even give him the respect he really demands and probably also deserves. Russia is an old country. Russia is an important, even we, India, Germany, we need Russia. Because we need Russia against China. Probably not from your perspective, but from my perspective, I'm a really radical Roman Catholic. I'm believing in God and I'm believing in Christianity. And there we have a Christian country, even Putin is in ethics, but it doesn't matter. I think having this big country, even it's not a democracy at our side, as a bilateral partner, giving them a chance with the EU and also the United States of America, having on eye level, same eye level. It is easy, it's an easy work. And it keeps us probably Russia away from China, because China needs the resources of Russia. And they're willing to give them because our sanctions sometimes are going the wrong way. But this is foreign policy. This is made by politicians. Of course, we cannot agree on.
He's breaking up. Is that the original recording that's breaking up, or
No, it must be
our connection?
You just pause it there. Anyway, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
It's near the end, but he actually just play it now. Does he? No. Anyway, he basically just ends there by saying, "And Crimea, forget about Crimea. Crimea is gone. It's not coming back."
Oh yes. Sorry, that.
So
That audio was very choppy, right? I don't think that was filmed.
no, it was on a phone or something.
It was meant a phone, or you notice how still it was. I wonder if it was just simply like something that was in the room, like a laptop or webcam that was turned on remotely. I bet somebody leaked that. He would not have said that if he knew that was going to go public.
Probably not. No, he's speaking confidentially. Yeah.
If anyone missed, the gist of it was basically, look, Putin. One of the first things that Putin deserves respect. Okay, that's a no-no. From the head of the German Navy, you can't be saying that, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's on board. They're all saying all kinds of things behind closed doors, which he thought that was. I think he said that. He also says, and at the end we missed it, but he says at the end, forget about the Crimean Peninsula. It's not coming back. It's Russian. That's also an absolute no-no. Apparently, what happened then, subsequent to these comments being leaked, he resigned his position as head of the Admiralty after the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry went ballistic
he was
and said
fired, basically.
he was fired.
Yeah, fired for saying that. So imagine someone like the head of the German Navy saying, I mean, the German Navy, I suppose, yeah, is Germany? No, it's not a landlocked country. The German Navy saying that, Putin just wants some respect, and he's not been given the respect that he deserves, and this whole situation could probably be solved if the West was to show some respect, the respect that he deserves to Putin,
And
and
something
for that,
else he said, we need Russia against
And we
China.
need Russia against China, and he gets fired for that. Lavrov and other Russian politicians who have to deal with the Americans is that these people are like, they vary between calling them like they're insane or they're like children. It's like trying to explain things to a child.
Yeah.
They don't seem to understand. So that's the attitude. And of course, Putin's not allowed to have any respect because of what I mentioned previously at the beginning of this little segment here, that by Western governments and the Western media, Putin, in particular, you know, the person, has been portrayed repeatedly supposedly with good evidence, most of which is bogus, portrayed as an evil madman, as a dictator, as a ruthless,
Someone
as a
beyond the
ruthless
pale,
assassin,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So, well, obviously you can't give any respect to someone like that, right? So what this guy said is just is crazy talk, you know. But of course, that's not how. They know, you know.
They
behind the
know.
scenes.
There's a super interesting headline. It's just a headline, so I won't bother sharing this, but people can look this up. Politico.eu. This was published before the German admiral's comments were released. The headline is Germany's pivot from America. Subheading, to outward appearances, Berlin is far from AWOL on Ukraine, i.e. it's with NATO and the US, 100% all the way. The subheading ends, but when the cameras are turned off, Germany's tone changes.
Right.
Which is what we just saw. He thought the cameras were off, so he said what he really thinks. So it's very interesting because it's been wall to wall. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. All NATO's behind this. Europe and America together, we're against, but there is no NATO unity here. Probably highlighted this week by the fact that Germany blocked the transit of at least some weapons. German weapons, as it turns out, being shipped from the US and Britain to Ukraine. They blocked its access over German airspace.
Well, that didn't stop a crap load more coming in from
It's still pouring
elsewhere.
in. Meanwhile, there's British Ministry of Defence representatives proudly showing off on Twitter. Maybe I'll show this one. Time lapse of flight tracking radar showing all the British shipments of weapons into Ukraine in the last few days, I think. Let's see if we can pull this one up. I've just sent it to you there. This is it's a tweet from George Allison. Who knows who he is? Self-described journalist, cybersecurity graduate, whatever. Play it there. Is it going to play?
Why is it? Yeah. Press
Is
play
that-
there now. No audio.
No, there is none, no.
Those
Just
are all the
shows
flights
the
going in and out of.
Flights from London. Look how they're going over Germany. They got permission to fly across Denmark, apparently. This is flight tracking radar showing British military craft flying back and forth from somewhere in central England, probably down near Salisbury, to Kiev from the 17th to the 19th. So just 2 days worth of weapons dumps. They have some nerve. Doing it right under. Russia sees all this, of course. I mean, if the British are proudly boasting their headlines, this isn't just, you know, some guy who's, you know, an insider sharing, you know, leaking information. British headlines the last few days have been full of stories about how we're sending troops to Ukraine, more advisors to train Ukraine's military, etc. The latest from Britain is just today, in fact. Did you see that one? British Foreign Office accused Russia of plotting to overthrow the government in Kiev with a puppet regime.
Yeah, well, they made that claim a few days ago as well, or I think the US made it or something. It's been on the vine basically for a few days, accusing, you know, they already sanctioned they have some guy under house arrest, a kind of pro-Russian. He's probably relatively moderate, but he's a politician in Ukraine. They have him under house arrest because they ID'd him as a possible coup plotter, right? I mean, they're just taking preemptive action to anybody who, in this scenario where Russia invades in some way Ukraine and then tries to, you know, causes the current Ukrainian kind of joke government to fall, which wouldn't be hard probably, and then set up a friendly government,
Yeah.
Russia-friendly government in Ukraine.
They've some nerve accusing Russia of wanting to do what they did
What they do all the time.
in
Well, they did in
2014. What they
2014.
did attempted
absolutely.
in 2004, and what they did successfully in 2014.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing about all this is that and there's a lot of troop movements. It's interesting to try and get a read on what's actually going on in terms of Russian thinking, what Russia intends, what their problem is. I mean, we haven't really fleshed that out properly, I don't think. We're just commenting on stuff. But what the problem with is. The problem, and we have said it before, the problem for Russia, or America's problem with Russia, is that Russia is a geopolitical adversary, and it's an adversary in the sense that it's not content. Russia is not content to sit back and have America dominate the world, which, at least in Russia's case and also China's case, means significant restrictions on the freedom of Russia and China to do what they're entitled to do in the world, which is, in many different areas, but to do business, to engage themselves in their backyard, to do business with people
to police situations, like in Syria or in Kazakhstan recently.
Yeah, to do business in whatever way they're able to do it, fairly, to exploit the natural resources that Russia has, whatever Russia has to offer to the world, it wants to be able to do that. And unfortunately, the way the world is set up and the way it has been set up, going back obviously decades to First, Second World War, America rules supreme, and Russia is by definition therefore a threat because it doesn't want to fall in line with the American vision of a unipolar world where America sits on top. And that's the essence of the problem, and has been. That was the essence of the problem, I suppose, with, I don't want to draw too many comparisons because they're not really relevant, but with during the Cold War, was about spheres of influence and pushing the Soviets back, and that just carried on with modern day Russia. They used the same playbook. Basically, when the Soviet Union fell, Russia lost quite a bit of territory, but it maintained, its primary landmass and most of its resources, and so the threat didn't change. Nothing changed between the first Cold War and now the second Cold War that we're in. Nothing from the American point of view. Russia is still the same threat it was then. Then they had the veneer of ideology of communism. We're pushing back against communism. We're fighting communism. Now they don't have that, so they have to say that Putin's a dictator and he wants to take over the world and blah blah blah. He wants to recreate. They keep saying he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, and they stop short of saying, and he wants to. He wants to recreate communism as well. You know what I mean? They'd love it to go back to the first Cold War, because then they'd have a veneer of ideological, but as ideological differences. But as it is ideological differences, but it's not communism versus capitalism. It's unipolar world versus multipolar world.
Russia isn't offering an alternative system.
No.
It's saying, we accept the basic rules of business.
Right.
Let's do business.
Right.
And that's, how do you get behind, how do you outflank that ideologically? You can't accept
demonize
dirty tactics.
Yeah. You demonize the person, make them a pariah if you can, a global pariah. And so faced with this, so obviously Russia sees that, knows that that's been the case, knows that the US in particular wants to take it down a peg or two. Russians obviously naturally are not inclined, the Russian government is not inclined to just go along with that. They don't think it's fair, it's not fair. And part of taking Russia down, the US's strategy to do that is obviously primarily economic. It's been information war, like we mentioned, over the past X number of years. They've tried to demonize Putin and Russia in general and cut them off from as many places that they can cut them off from on that basis. But also they're being more direct now with Nord Stream 2. That's like too far for America, that Russia might have more influence over Europe because of the energy dependence of Europe on Russia. And so the Russians know this and know that America's out to get them, basically, and they're not sure, they weren't 100% sure how far they're willing to go, but they had the measure of the Americans for quite a long time. And in order to protect themselves, like we've said in previous shows, that because America does pose potentially a military threat, that's why Russia has built up their military over the past 20 years to a fairly high degree where there's a kind of stalemate. because they knew that America would use its military prowess as leverage, as a threat to Russia to fall in line. So Russia pushed back by developing its own military prowess to equalize that out. And but America still is a military threat to Russia. The expansion of NATO is the expansion of America towards Russia's borders. When you see that you've got an enemy who really doesn't like you for no good reason other than they don't like you because you're a competitor, and that you're not sure, they're kind of crazy, and they have a history of going in and attacking countries and bombing them and blowing them up and starting wars in different places, then you've got to be wary of that country, and you'd like to have a kind of buffer zone around your borders so that that enemy couldn't advance right up to your border, because who knows the hell what they'd do. Mm-hmm. And Ukraine, Belarus is one buffer zone that remains intact, but Ukraine fell, like you said, in 2014 to the West under an organised coup in 2014 by Victoria Nuland, almost single-handedly. And Ukraine was turned into a kind of neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, ultra-nationalist kind of state, at least in terms of the governing party and the governing, the minds or the attitudes of the people within the government, and very anti-Russian. So Ukraine went from a fairly moderate, reasonably friendly towards Russia state because it's right on its border, does a lot of trade, has a lot of history together, into a very antagonistic anti-Russian government and, in theory, state which right on its border, which then
completely unbalanced the country, because it had been relatively balanced since independence in 1991, because its political makeup is roughly half pro-Russian, half pro-West.
Right.
It's a split down the middle. So when you take an extreme of one half and say, we're in charge now, of course the country is going to end up having breakaway republics, war,
sure.
Civil war. It's a state of civil war.
Yeah, so in 2014 they had the coup, and the main point of the coup obviously was, like we said, to turn Ukraine into a very pro-West, anti-Russian government that would do whatever the West wanted it to do in order to antagonize Russia. But the other primary objective was to take Crimea, which is away from Russia, and specifically Russia's Black Sea Fleet naval base in Sevastopol in Crimea. They wanted, part of that planning in 2014 was to deny Russia access to its naval base there, which it had rented from Ukraine on a 25-year lease. They were going to nix that contract and say, bye-bye, you don't have any more access to your naval base in Crimea, and therefore you have no more access for the Russian Navy to the Mediterranean, except by going all the way around the world, right? So Russia responded to that, knew that that was a big part of the plan in the coup in 2014, and they responded to it by basically taking Crimea. Now, Crimea is overwhelmingly Russian and pro-Russian, so it was no problem to take it. There was no resistance, except from the Ukrainian government. And they also then but they facilitated people right on in the east of Ukraine, on Russia's border, who are overwhelmingly Russian and speak Russian and pro-Russian, feel like they're Russian. They declared these unrecognized people's republics of Luhansk and Donetsk, and that's where the fighting has been going on since then, with the Ukrainian government and the neo-Nazi types trying to take that back.
And that ostensibly came to a stalemate in itself with the Minsk Accords,
right?
That everyone agreed,
right,
West and Russia together, to at least adhere to. But in practice, since then, it's just degenerated.
Yeah, and there was no motivation for it either in Ukraine or within the US. The US and the West had no interest in adhering to the Minsk protocols, which was basically would have allowed for a level of independence, or more or less independence, for those two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, and becoming maybe eventually part of Russia in some way or other, or more or less, in everything but name, part of Russia. There was no way the Ukrainian government was going to take that. They want Crimea back. They want those two regions back. And so the Minsk protocol, the Minsk agreements were never adhered to, and there was no motivation in the US to encourage Ukrainians to adhere to it, i.e. stop bombing Donetsk.
Not in practice, but in theory, the US leaned on Kiev and got them to sign the damn things.
Yes.
They did officially agree to
initially,
Washington and Kiev and Berlin and Paris.
But the reason they did that was because they had no ability at that time, and there was no will in the West, certainly not in Europe and not in America either, to do anything militarily about getting those two regions back. But in the past 7 years, what America has been doing, primarily America has been doing, has been training and upgrading the Ukrainian military into a force that is potentially, much more likely and much more able to take those two regions back, and possibly even take Crimea back. And Russia's in a bind then in that situation because, everybody knows that it illegally annexed Crimea. So any move by Crimea or by Ukraine to take back Crimea would be totally justified. And if America can help them to do that with weapons and training and all that kind of stuff, and even American personnel, then that's all fair, right? But in that situation, what does Russia do? Does it fight? Does it start a war over Crimea? So the big problem here all along since 2014, and the reason the Minsk agreements were signed by Ukraine and by the US effectively, is because they did not have a military option to retake Crimea.
And there was a risk of Donetsk and Luhansk spreading to Mariupol and further along.
Yeah. So
and taking more of Ukraine.
You just pause for a minute until we get our act together here.
Which is very much a tactic we saw over and over in Syria. How many ceasefires were called so that ISIS
could regroup,
Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra could regroup, re-attack, rearm.
Yeah.
So that's where you think that the big story is there. And now we're at a situation where they, as you put it, in December, you were worried that there's some kind of supreme confidence that's overcome Western and Ukrainian attitudes towards Crimea and the Donbass. And that in turn was alarming Putin. And that's why he called for emergency talks.
Because they were planning, at least at first, to take back, to invade the Ukrainian army with the help of America, obviously trained, armed, funded, whatever. We're going to try and take back Donetsk and Luhansk and try and draw try and draw Russia into, defending that population. Now, of course, there would have been a lot of death as a result of that, and Russia again would have been put in a bind. They saw this is where it was going, and they also saw the Nord Stream 2 thing happening, where America was basically putting pressure on Germany to stop Nord Stream 2 and hit Russia economically.
Successfully for now.
Yeah. So Russia's not happy about it. They see an end game coming up. These people are going for broke. We need to do something about it. Either way, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't, in a certain sense. They're going to force our hand. They're trying to force our hand. How do we get out of a situation where they're trying to force our hand? Well, in that situation, the only thing you can do is do what Russia has done, which is put on a big show of amassing troops around Ukraine on three sides, effectively. And to try, not necessarily to invade, but to show, listen, we're not happy with where this is going. We know where you're going. We can see where you're going. We're not taking it. We're not just going to sit back and take it. We're not going to be baited into this bullshit by you. And you've left us no option but to try and show you how serious we are.
As Putin says, we have nowhere left to retreat.
Yeah. How serious we are about pushing back against what you're trying to do, that it's unjustified and you shouldn't do it, you can't do it, it's not fair. And hopefully, I think initially their plan, it's obviously, there's no definite concrete plan, let's say, but because people shouldn't think that just because they're amassing all these troops and equipment along Ukraine's border, that's a planned invasion. The first step is to do that and then negotiate.
Yes, which is
what we've seen. Try and primarily try and put pressure on Europe.
Yes,
which
is what that admiral we heard him talk about that.
Right, because they know that
Putin is trying to split Europe. Right.
Well, he's not trying to split Europe. He's trying to appeal to some sane minds in Europe to get them to stop aligning with the US in this crazy madcap scheme to try and
use neo-Nazis to overtake Ukraine.
Yeah, to bait Russia into a war and put it in a bind, and the Russian government is showing that, look, we're not just going to roll over and take this, and maybe we might invade. Here's what we can do if we need to. We don't want to do it because it wouldn't be good for anybody, but here's what we can do. Now that you've seen what we can do, i.e. amassing all these troops and showing what we could do, can we talk?
Right.
So there's no point in going talking without having done that. You do that first, and then you go and try and talk. And of course, they've tried to talk several times over the past couple of months, repeated meetings with the US and some with the Europeans. But they realise that, there's probably back channel stuff going on with the Europeans that isn't public.
Yeah.
But the overt one is America.
Shoigu was in London.
Yeah. But the overt talks are with America. And they know that there's not much they can. There has to be a two-track method there where you're dealing with America publicly, and it's in all the papers and it's talked about, and you're creating an atmosphere of dialogue, and hoping that America will you'll put it in the limelight enough where it'll have to kind of like pretend to be a nice guy, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pretend to do
Oh,
the
well,
right
Anthony
thing.
Blinken with Lavrov. I mean, Lavrov is the kind of gent who forces everyone around him to be a gentleman.
Right.
So Blinken sounded very diplomatic
Yeah, yeah.
after meeting him in Vienna or wherever last week.
Yeah. So I think that's what's going on behind the scenes. Of course, things can go wrong at any point, and in this whole process. There can be a fifth, kind of fifth column, or a
Yeah.
divisory element in there that might
Go behind the US government.
Beyond any oversight or beyond any any approval, would do something that would try and provoke a situation, almost in a reckless, screw it, we don't care type attitude. Let's just have it out, basically,
Yeah.
with no consideration for the people or the entire
And
situation.
or with a view to making real the threat that Biden articulated, namely severing basically full financial siege of Russia by kicking it out of the SWIFT system, inability to trade, certainly with the West. That would be a bombshell. I mean, it's well understood by the Europeans, the Americans themselves understand the consequences. We reported on their SWIFT scheme to financially strangle Russia, and they acknowledge there's going to be a lot of blowback, even for us in America. But we can weather it.
Well, it's the same as the America during the Second World War, and to a certain extent the First World War, was happy to have a war on the European continent, because they're 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean. They can all suffer and die and have their towns and cities destroyed, but over in America we'll all be kicking it up and essentially immune for it. It's the same attitude, basically, exactly the same attitude, exactly the same mentality of it's okay to have a war in the European landmass from the American point of view. Why? Because there's 3,000 miles of ocean between us.
Yeah, and heck, if it means reverting Europe back to the situation at the end if it means erasing the chessboard back to 1945, well, we were left standing. Everywhere else was a wasteland. And then we just used a Marshall Plan and rebuilt Europe. Yeah, let's just go back to basics.
Took over, yeah.
Can you pull up that article I sent you? Because I think this is the German opposition, the new opposition leader. He just laid out exactly what you said on either the last show or the one before that. Headline: German conservative leader warns against Russian SWIFT suspension. That's the financial stranglehold plan they have for Russia. The first 4 paragraphs say it all. The incoming leader of Germany's conservative CDU, Friedrich Merz, has warned against suspending Russia from the international banking payment system as a potential punishment for any Russian attack of Ukraine. He said calling SWIFT into question could be an atomic bomb for the capital markets and also for goods and services. We should leave SWIFT untouched. I would see massive economic setbacks for our own European economies if something like that happens. It would hit Russia, but we would be damaging ourselves considerably, he warned.
For global trade, yeah.
Then
he says the suspension of Moscow would basically break the back of the international payment traffic.
That we're talking here the Samson option of world finance.
That's what they've got.
And the US has explicitly threatened it. Now,
psychos off the leash, basically, is what you're dealing with. And the thing is, the Russians know it. They know it very well. And all they can do now is, like, if you've got to
stand up to the psycho and try to outsucker them.
No. Well,
like you said to me earlier this week.
Well, maybe, but
who's the bigger psycho?
Not
that the Russians, the psycho
well,
in
they
it.
Do. They have multiple, a few different tracks to it. I mean, what you do with America is, like I was saying there a few minutes ago, is you pull them into the limelight. If you've got a crazy person who has a veneer of has a reputation for being a reasonable person, but in private in the back room they're going ape shit at you and they're screaming and frothing at the mouth and going crazy, and they might kill you. They're threatening to kill you. What you do is you kind of get people in, or you pull them out into the street and say, "Hey, listen, let's talk about this outside in front of everybody." And the person who's just frothing at the mouth goes, "Yes," and you get them to say
what they mean and to do what they say.
Yeah, well,
to some extent,
you get them to live up to their supposed reputation of being all for freedom and democracy and the rule of law, right?
And the world's policeman.
Well, not the world's policeman, but the international law and the rule of law, basically. And there can be no sign of any kind of aggressive, threatening, I'm going to kill you kind of behavior, that type of thing. So you get them to say stuff that is in your interest on the public stage, and they know is in their interest as well, because they want to keep up their appearance, keep up their reputation. And if you can get them to say that kind of stuff and appear that way on the international stage, then at least, I don't know, you kind of stall them a little bit, and then at the same time you're talking to other people about them, trying to get your kind of gather some allies basically.
Yeah. Which it looks like Russia is doing, from what we've heard from the opposition leader in Germany and from the German admiral.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. So in a sense, it's all Ukraine, but actually it's all about Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
a
sure.
greater geopolitical issue is at stake for the US, and or specifically for that fifth column of the imperial office that secretly rules the US, the so-called deep state.
Yeah, for sure. The bottom line is that Russia's it's a good two-track method where, like I said, you put all of your military hardware, you show what you're able to do. I mean, they've obviously got a lot of scope to deal with Donetsk and Luhansk. It's right on the border north. They're having war games or military exercise, let's say, in Belarus on the Polish border with Belarus.
With S-400s.
And then below that, they're putting in S-400s, and they have troops looking straight down at Ukraine and not far from Kiev. And then on the south side at Crimea, they're having some naval exercises in the Mediterranean around the same time that NATO is having some naval exercises in the Mediterranean.
Right.
And there's several ships that came from the Baltic, from their northern fleet that sailed around past the UK and down into the Mediterranean, or en route right now, and they're joining in there for some naval exercises. And there's boats that came from, or ships that came from Crimea, from the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea, to join those. But the ones that are coming from the Baltic are coming at this time, or from the Northern Fleet are coming at this time, so that when those games are over, and they can take for however long they need them to take, and they can be stopped at any point in time, those extra 4 or 5 ships that came from the Northern Fleet and the Baltic are available to go to the Black Sea to bolster the fleet in the Black Sea. So that's off the south coast of Ukraine. On the east, you've got Donetsk and Luhansk and a lot of troops there, and in the north, you've got the only border that really isn't protected is or isn't covered by the Russians is the western border. So yeah, if that doesn't work, that show of force doesn't work, and showing that we mean business doesn't work to get them to come to the table and to accept our reasonable demands. Like, forget about democracy. I mean, it's so hypocritical for the Western, especially the US and Western politicians to be saying that it's outrageous for Russia to demand that Ukraine never becomes part of NATO, and that that America stays out of Ukraine and stuff, because it's up to Ukraine to decide their own
sovereign decision.
When
it's
they
a
were
puppet client government.
When they had a coup in 2014, organized by the US. So, but that show of force tries to, convince them that we mean business, and you need to be reasonable here. You're not going to lose anything. All you're going to lose is your opportunity to have a go at us, and you're just going to have to deal with not getting to take us down. And saner heads hopefully would prevail when you see that we're at least showing that we're willing to take serious military action. If that doesn't work, then you have the opportunity to make good on your threats. It's not even a threat. You're making good on. You're actualizing the potential that you put in place around Ukraine.
So it comes down to,
and it'll ultimately be their choice after this long, protracted period of discussions and all this military show of Russia around the borders of Ukraine. If the West and Europe in particular doesn't say, listen, okay, let's talk and let's actually hammer something out that everybody's happy with. If they don't do that, and if they continue to stonewall Russia and say, listen, and all those talks go nowhere, they're a waste of time, and Russia then invades Ukraine, well, Europe literally will have only itself to blame. Because it's not like it didn't have an opportunity to to resolve the issue.
Yeah.
It did. It was
Yeah.
given multiple opportunities to resolve the issue. But if Europe continues to listen to America and have America dictate everything that Europe does, basically vis-a-vis Russia, well then Europe will suffer. And that's what America. Maybe I don't know if America's planning that, but it certainly might. Certain elements of the American establishment have no problem with Russia, with Europe suffering. It's not.
It might even fit into what we spoke of when energy price rises were skyrocketing in the autumn. But they don't mind because it fits the other post-geopolitical, long-term apocalyptic scenario of catastrophic man-made climate change, as they frame it, causing massive rolling power shortages in Europe. Well, let's bring that in. Let's bring that in a way we control. So we don't mind if the button is pushed regarding Ukraine. Then we activate our sanctions plan against Russia. World economy goes downwards, and they probably in their hubris think we can manage this. Keep Europe on side and watch its economies contract 20, 30, 40%. But increasing their dependence on us, increasing shipments from America to Europe of energy supplies, etc. That's where they think this is going, the grand plan.
Well, that's one eventuality that they wouldn't have much of a problem with, you know. Ideally, they'd like to just screw over Russia and leave everything else untouched. But if that's unlikely, or if it looks like they'd be taking a big risk that you wouldn't just screw over Russia, like that guy was saying, that you'd be screwing over Europe in particular and the global economy, there's quite a few, maybe a majority of people in the Washington establishment who would be quite okay with that. They think they can ride it out, and they'll always
That's the question.
come out
Is
on top.
there, how far into pathocracy are these people?
Pretty deep, way down the pipe, yeah, definitely. And again, Russia knows it, and the reason Russia has taken the stance is because it knows it's dealing with hypocrisy. It knows it's dealing with effectively deranged people who
A
you
government
cannot
that's
talk to.
gone beyond the pale.
Yeah, they've lost their
Beyond the
minds
pale.
effectively.
I thought there was an interesting anecdotal proof of that emerged this week. It's a long article. I won't share it because I'll be scrolling forever through it. People have probably heard about it by now. It's a New York Times special. Fair play to the New York Times for doing this. They relied now on leaks, US government leaks. But anyway, the story was that in 2017, the US bombed from the sky with the heaviest conventional bombs they have, real bunker buster type stuff, the largest dam in Syria that holds back the Euphrates and Lake Assad. That was right on the Kiev battle zone over Raqqa with ISIS and Russian troops and all that stuff that was going on at the time, the proxy war. And it was nuts. They actually tried to blow the thing up.
They claim they just tried to
First
blow up the
off,
towers.
they denied they did it. It's only just emerged, thanks to those leaks, that indeed the US government actually did drop bombs from the sky to blow up. They denied it at the time. They said, that's a Russian conspiracy theory. Only crazy people would try to blow up a major Euphrates dam.
and kill tens of thousands of people.
It would have killed hundreds or tens certainly of thousands of people. We're talking about a massive catastrophic flood right along the Euphrates. The only reason it stayed standing was because an emergency ceasefire was called between ISIS, Syrian forces, and the Russians. ISIS agreed with the Syrians that they would bring in Russian specialists to do emergency technical repair work on the dam to stop it from flooding. Holy smokes. Oh, that wasn't enough, by the way, because the dam started to overflow from the top, so water levels were rising. It just wasn't catastrophic, so it all didn't come down at once. The only way they were able to stop that from happening was because Turkey, the Turkish government, stepped in and it agreed to do dam work further up the Euphrates that slowed
Slow
the
the flow,
flow of the river.
Yeah.
So that came out just, last week. That is beyond the pale. I should specify that in the report, and this is probably why it was kosher. It was okay for the New York Times to report on this. There was plausible deniability. At the time, obviously, it's the Trump regime, Trump administration. The Biden regime, the Trump administration, let's get our terms correct, didn't know about it. They actually didn't know about it. And what emerged in the leak was that someone went behind and no one knows where that chain of command leads to. Of course, this is deep state type stuff to get the okay on it. And that there was a special operations unit, I forget the name, it's mentioned in the report, that went ahead and did it. And that the reason these government insiders, Pentagon, whoever they were, that agreed to speak to the Times, because they were so like, it was an eye opener for them. This was Pentagon people learning in the course of their real time daily jobs that something is out of control in our government. Yeah. It was a shock to them, you know. They hear about deep state stuff in the media and like, whatever, I work in the Pentagon, I know how it works. They were learning how the world works, despite being career professional American military men. This is actually how it works. And they were so shocked, that's why they were prompted to go to the New York Times and leak this. Yeah. So there's this element, like you say, it's beyond the pale of civilization. It's a mad dog, and that's why it's so difficult for Russia to
deal with it,
to talk to it, because it does then, it talks to Blinken at one moment, it talks to Biden at one moment, and they talk reasonably well about a happy medium. We both agree we can't do X, but there's this thing behind the scenes that goes, X, they don't want X, let's do X.
Yep.
Let's see what happens.
Well, there's also the fact that Blinken as a Secretary of State, or the Secretary of State? Yeah, goes to... has a meeting with Putin or with Lavrov and then goes back. He doesn't make any decisions. He doesn't say what we can or can't do necessarily. The Russians ask for a list of requests or demands or whatever, and for the US to respond, Blinken to respond. Blinken doesn't respond there and then. You'd think that someone who of his stature would be able to go there and actually respond directly to the requests and tell him exactly whether we can give those requests or we can accede to those requests or not. But he can't. He listens and he goes back. And who does he go back and talk to? He has to go back and talk to someone and get approval or not approval or whatever on those requests from the Russians.
The foreign minister of the United States does not have...
No. Well, he's going back to someone in the CIA or someone in the intel agency, effectively, in some command structure that goes up there, maybe some generals involved or whatever. So he's not the... In the same way that Biden, obviously, is not the commander-in-chief... Blinken is
not the foreign minister, the chief foreign representative of the United States of America.
Just a ceremonial position, really, you know.
Yeah,
a kind of a gopher, you know. I noticed we don't have any chat on our show today. Is there a reason for
that? What's the story?
We're having a bitrate problem today.
Oh.
It's streaming off and on.
Okay, so it's choppy.
Okay,
all right.
That's a shame. Sorry for all you trying to listen and follow us. The show will, of course, be uploaded shortly elsewhere, and you'll be able to watch the whole thing. So.
Yeah. So just talking about the last thing, talking about US. There was an interesting the past week, 5 days ago. It's a Yahoo Money article. Party preference among voters swings 14 points towards the Republican Party ahead of the midterms. So in Biden's first full year in office has resulted in, and it's in here, it's one of the largest that there was a Gallup poll. The swing is among the largest that Gallup has registered since it began to measure party identification in 1991. It's the fourth paragraph there.
Interesting.
So, and they say among the largest, but there's other places saying that it is the largest swing ever in party, in political affiliation, let's say.
I saw
party
Anderson Cooper on CNN. They had a guy on who said, we're going to get obliterated.
Yeah. And you wonder why that is. And you wonder if that's not a kind of writing of the statistics or a writing of the opinion polls a year after an election that was... Are you allowed to say this? Is this medical misinformation as well? An election that was probably fraudulent.
Well, what you can say is what was claimed, that the United States saw, the Democratic Party's candidate, Joe Biden, the oldest candidate ever for the United States, saw the largest number of votes for any party ever in the history of the country. So you got to put that statistic against this statistic and go, they both can't be true.
Yeah. Exactly. People can't. Biden just. I mean, was Biden's awesome, super awesome, a little over a year ago, so different than he is today? that everybody back then thought he was the awesomest president ever, and they all voted for him in the greatest numbers ever,
To get rid of Trump.
just to get rid of Trump. Was that the reason? Did so many people hate Trump?
That's what they said.
Yeah, but that's not. Well, we've talked about this before, and people who voted for Trump against Clinton, they knew everything, that all the demonization and the presentation of Trump and the way that he was presented was already done by the time he was elected.
Yeah.
That summer of 2016, the summer 2016, they went through it all. They called him all sorts of names. There's a whole kind of...
That's where Russian collusion started.
Right. He was demonized up the wazoo before he got elected, and he still got elected and won. So the people who voted for him in the next 4 years, there's nothing Trump did that would have made them think that he was the worst president ever, because they saw it all and voted for him anyway. And they accurately or correctly disbelieved most of it and voted for him anyway. So for the next 4 years, there's nothing he did. In fact, his 4 years, the 4 years of his administration would have, at the very least, kept the same number of people that voted for him, or most likely increased the number of people who were favourable to him, especially in the context of Biden being the alternative. So none of it fits with any rational, logical assessment of the situation, and especially now within a year or a year after Biden's first term, it kind of, the polls, the first legitimate polls show really what the voters
But as Biden
thought during last year's election.
as Biden was at pains to point out last week, very, very clearly, very loudly, it's not who votes that counts, but who counts the vote. The gas thing is, I think he thought he was saying this. He was saying this in the context of a democratic bill to make it easier to vote in the United States, i.e. to have no ID of any kind, so that newly arrived migrants,
Right. No voter ID.
unregistered,
Would have done that, yeah. No voter
undocumented
ID.
Americans can vote. But he was shouting this. What he thought he was saying here was the Republican side is basically manipulating vote counts, and has been for a long time, because they make it difficult for the segments of American society who would vote for our side, the Democratic Party, to vote. But that's just, he said it, but he didn't understand what it really means. When he
Not
quoted-
having any voter ID favors the Democrats. Not requiring voter ID, which
Yeah.
is what they passed, obviously favors the Democrats.
Yeah.
What non-ID carrying voters are there that are going to vote for the Republican? Historically, I mean, the Republican voters are all true blue Americans who are all, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Most immigrants are the ones who wouldn't have IDs or would have, would be unable to produce IDs, are the ones who have been allowed into the country by Democrats. So they vote Democrat.
Yeah.
Whatever, doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever. Yeah,
But we'll see. Last year was the longest US presidential election count in history. Maybe this year's will be the longest congressional midterm in history. You know,
yeah.
we're in a new normal.
Yeah, in other depressing news, Yemen is being bombed, uptaking the bomb. Saudi bombing of Yemen, of course, which is effectively American bombing of Yemen.
Yeah. Did that drop off during the pandemic? What happened
It
there?
did a little
There was
bit, yeah.
news about it
yeah,
dropped off.
It did a little bit, yeah, but it's ticked up again. Yeah, of course, the Houthis supposedly attacked a couple of weeks ago there, fired some kind of missiles or whatever at the UAE, at Abu Dhabi. Killed a Pakistani and an Indian, I think. And they claimed this was an outrage and a crime and stuff. Those people throw Pakistanis and Indians off buildings all the time, you know what I mean? Because they don't work fast enough. So it's like the idea that they're crying tears over a Pakistani or an Indian worker who got killed in a Houthi drone strike or whatever it was on Abu Dhabi is ridiculous. But in response, they bombed basically a kind of like a detention. They say it's a detention facility, but it seems that it was like just that might have been the center of it, but it was like a whole kind of area, a district, and killed over 100 people. And of course, for people who don't know, Yemen is obviously an ongoing conflict, pretty brutal, facilitated fully by America and the Brits and the French. There's a bunch of them involved in it.
Oh, yeah.
And they're all, and the UAE obviously, and they're all, the problem there is Iran, basically. They're terrified of Iran. America's terrified of Iran. Israel's terrified of Iran. UAE, Saudi Arabia is terrified of Iran. And Iran probably is supporting the Houthis, who are Shia Muslims in Yemen, in a kind of proxy war in a certain sense against Saudi Arabia and that Western dominated, Western propped up system in the Middle East with Saudi at the middle of it. But they're showing, characteristic brutality and recklessness and carelessness for human life, But that's the way the empire rolls and has rolled for quite a long time. So
Yeah, and the Western media dutifully reports the atrocity,
but
but just leaves it as Saudi Arabia. It doesn't mention that the bombs were British, the planes were American, and the people coordinating the flights back in the airbase were probably American or British or French.
For sure. Yeah, that's the way it works. But it's nothing new to us. Like, it's old news in a certain sense. It's been going on for all the time we've been doing this. But yeah. Anything else popped up on your radar this week? On your
I thought this was a funny story.
Yeah.
The Irishman. Well, there's
Terrible.
two.
Go on.
There's two stories. I have one of them.
You better give it to...
Who does this? I've sent it now across the tube. You can pull that one up. Imagine, it's like something out of that movie.
Yeah.
Two suspects bring propped up dead man to post office to collect his pension.
Yeah.
What's the name of that movie?
Waking Ned Devine.
Waking Ned Devine, that's it. Where the guy's dead and they find his lottery ticket. It's the winning lottery ticket, so they prop him up. The whole town tries to get the spoils.
The two men brought a corpse to a post office in the Irish city of Carlow on Friday. Carlow, yeah, definitely. Trying to collect his pension. The staff immediately became alarmed and contacted the authorities. No shit. No money was handed over, and it is understood that the late man is well known to those who tried to use his body, and that he would have wanted it anyway. He approved. Local officials expressed shock, saying the deceased was a nice man by all accounts and someone who caused no offence to anyone. Well, so then nobody would mind his friends having his pension. Except the state. And the next one? From our Irish desk.
I don't have it.
Go on,
I
tell
have
us
to
what
look
it
for
is.
it. Huh?
Tell us what it is then.
Was it a transatlantic flight?
Mm.
So on a transatlantic flight, an Irishman was arrested and is facing 20 years in prison.
Coming from America. Going to America.
Going to the States for, quote, pulling down his trousers and exposing his buttocks on the flight because he wouldn't wear a mask.
Right, yeah.
I don't know, but I would bet that drink was involved.
Possibly. Apparently he was going to play football. Join some kind of football training camp or something.
What kind of football?
I
American
don't know.
football?
I don't know. They just said football. But, yeah. Well, it's a sign of the times, I think.
He's had enough. He's like, I'll show you me face. Here.
Put a mask on that.
Yeah, there has to be leniency for the fact that one, he's Irish, and two, drink was involved.
Exactly.
20 years in prison is harsh.
It should be acquitted. Like, well, they
Yeah.
just say 20 years in prison. But, I mean, 20 years in prison for mooning on a plane, like, that's, geez, you don't live in a democracy anymore, you know. That's something that happened in Russia under the evil dictator Putin. He wouldn't tolerate anybody being mooned. Fragile air hostesses being mooned on a plane.
So, yeah, that's all we have to say about
The war in Vietnam.
the war in Ukraine. Do you think it's going to happen? What's next?
Come on now.
Kick off.
Looking for a crystal ball. We'll have to wait and see. But it's definitely, there could be some action, yeah, but I think the whole vaunted or much talked about economic woes will probably come out of it in one way or another. You know?
Yeah.
Whatever happens to precipitate it, that's what'll be the result. I'm not expecting any. Certainly, there's not going to be any hot war. I don't think. Full on or whatever between either Russia and Europe or Russia and certainly not Europe. Like, Europe doesn't have the capability, doesn't have the stomach for it, basically, and America just doesn't care. They'd much prefer it to be an economic crisis rather than anything military. Well, they can't win any kind of military conflict with Russia anyway, so, and they're not willing to go there. Mutually assured destruction is the rule there, you know. So it has to be something other than that. Russia can do what it wants in Ukraine. It just has to decide whether it wants to do it or not.
Yeah. What the empire is seeking is the quote-unquote justification to execute its financial stranglehold of Russia.
Right.
That's
exactly
what we're to look out for.
Yep. For sure, yeah. So, I think we'll wrap it up there for this week. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for chatting, if you indeed chatted. I know Alejo sent us a little message there. And it's true, he said he doesn't realize that the US was calling their own bluff in relation to the swing towards Republicans. You know what I mean? I think that's what it was in relation to. Realize they're calling their own bluff in relation to them about the election, basically. You know, they're kind of exposing that for any rational person or a reasonable person, the election must have been dodgy if there can have such a massive swing away from Biden over the first year of his administration. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. So yeah, we'll be back. Like I said, thanks for watching, listening, all that stuff. We'll be back next week with another update on whatever has been going on between now and then. And there's the chat, finally. We can finally see the chat. Yeah, what was I saying? We'll be back next week. More talking about whatever's been going on, more analysis, more figuring stuff out and giving you the proper picture of what's going on if you need it. So until then, have a good week and see you later.
See you later. Thanks for watching.
Can't stop the signal now.